In time, you will need no teacher. For as the individual has voice, so has that in which the individual exists. Life itself has speech, and is never silent. Man contacts the matter that surrounds him through the agency of his senses. They are the doors and windows through which messages reach him from the great outside world. He reacts to these messages according as they conform to or are opposed to his desires. They thus produce in him pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, likes and dislikes. The sense contacts which bring pleasure to some may have adverse effects on others, and be the cause of aversions and dislikes. Gross matter has the power to arouse sensations, memories, and desires. The aspects of matter in its subtler forms have the same tendency. The atmosphere that hangs around places, the influences that the mere presence of a man can generate, the spontaneous arising of sense-laden images in the mind are instances of how matter can affect us, producing in us elation or depression, joy or the dread of harm. The pairs of opposites are numerous: heat and cold, fame and ignominy, joy and sorrow are but examples. Any one of a pair may come to birth, reach its peak and die, yielding place to its opposite number to arise and take over control of the lower mind and emotions of the man. He who thinks that he can move from one crest of enjoyment to another mistakes. If he mounts the crest of a wave, he must as inexorably go into the trough. If he is for the moment in the grip of pleasure, he will have to meet the cyclic onrush of pain. The seeking to prolong a desired experience interminably, and to stretch it to cover an entire lifetime is but a pipe dream. Inexorably pain must follow on the footsteps of pleasure, and tears be not far away from the laughter of humans. Man senses this. He has lived too many lives not to know this instinctively. Yet it seems that the lesson has not been learnt, and he therefore continues still to seek his felicity in material things. Writhing in pain, he still hankers after pleasure. Immersed in pleasure, he forgets that pain is waiting just round the corner, ready to strike the instant that the momentum of pleasure has exhausted itself. This oscillation between the two constituents of a pair is peculiar to matter, and therefore to the mortal aspects of the man. The Bhagavad Gita says that those enjoyments which arise through the contact of the senses with external objects are wombs of pain, since they have a beginning and an end. The wise man delighteth not in these. The marks of the immortal and the imperishable are given thus: the weapon divideth it not, the fire burneth it not, the water corrupteth it not, the wind drieth it not away. One interpretation of this could be that things of earth, fire, water, and air have no power to reach to or to affect the inner man. Following on this, it would not be wrong to infer that anything which can be divided or disintegrated by weapons and properties of earth, anything which can be burnt by fire, anything which water can corrupt, or the air sear, is mortal and therefore contains within itself what the Gita calls a womb of pain. These mortal aspects, and they are legion, can never bring lasting enjoyment. In fact, their touch will produce in the man reactions which must sooner or later sway him from one pole to another of any one of the several pairs of opposites. From these instructions, it can be inferred that there exists a wisdom which cannot be reached by a delving into or a deep study of the powers and properties that reside in plant, mineral, or the elements. Those who pin their faith on the researches of modern science or on the abstruse findings of the alchemists forget that they deal only with the evanescent aspects of things. When the human mind loses itself for long periods in the quest of the hitherto undiscovered aspects of matter, it, by that very concentration, disengages itself from the higher and therefore the spiritual potentialities. The forces attracted by a too close study of mortal aspects strikes up a harmonic vibration in those chords, in the man's makeup as are responsive by consanguinity or karmic heirloom. Vibrations so set up loosen morals, because they have the power to stir up the desire nature, and once this bastion falls, there troop in lust, anger, greed, and envy. He who gets engrossed in the properties that reside in the perishable side of things is apt to lose his hold upon the spirit. In such case, sooner or later, altruism leaves him utterly, and he remains that strange being that has an acute reason but a distorted perspective. He has eyes but sees not. He has a mind that yields no true understanding. The fire of intellection may for a time look wonderful, but the glow fades, and death quenches it, leaving but the ashes of a wasted life. The dust ultimately claims its own. Lust, anger, and greed mark the behavior of the man who leans heavily upon the emotional oscillations that matter continuously generates. His thirst is not killed out by satiety, but gains on him, so that like the drunkard, he needs must rush often and then oftener to his flagon of wine. He cannot be angry if the object of his desire is snatched away from him. He deeply resents someone else experiencing the very enjoyment which is denied him by man or nature. So is generated envy, and then follows greed, which compels him to store away his source of pleasure. The idea that his stock may be diminished if shared with another is abhorrent to him. The very concept of such a depletion is agonizing, and he remains a prey to mental anguish and self-inflicted torture. Ambition to hug wealth and fame and position, or to have children, wife, and household. Anger at being laid aside and sidestepped through deceit or even merit. Envy and having a raging hunger at the time when he sees another satiating his desires in abundant measure. These are all indications that the animal in the man is very much alive and has still the power to go on a rampage. Bulwer Lytton has said that the soul of man cannot mirror both heaven and earth, and that the one disappears from its surface as soon as the other is reflected upon its deep. Where lust, anger, and envy are reflected, there charity, brotherliness, and generosity are effaced. You cannot have light and darkness playing at the same time on the same spot in space. When man seeks for that knowledge which cannot but arouse lust, anger, and greed in himself or another, he, by that act of searching, repels his own spiritual nature, because his mind, oriented to his wish, can but pick up and retain such knowledge as is consubstantial to his materialistic bent. How then can his coarsened mind retain and protect undefiled or undistorted the higher wisdom, the nobler science? When man, even the vile man and the boor, even when such as he glimpses the halo behind the sacrifice, he kindles in himself a fire that burns the dross of ages. He may refuse to feed the holy fire, and in his intoxication extinguish it, preferring to live in the darkened oscillations of the nether gloom. But the light has a consciousness of its own, It cannot be denied. It will search him out even if he flee to the far corners of the earth, and light up the mean and squalid pettiness of his existence. Such is the fate of the coward and the renegade, the deserter of the battlefield, and the patricide of his higher potentialities. For the one who through the worst of divagations still remembers his pedigree, still yearns for the nobler life, there may be breakers ahead, and life may present to him horrifying pictures that may chill his soul. Yet, if he but keep the spark alive, it will surely one day light his life and make it rich and benign, so that fruits follow it. The divine spark is kindled and fed by sacrifice and by devotion. It is sacrifice when at humbler stages the man resists the impulses which arise from lust and anger. The man offers these, his successes and even his failures, to the Supreme that he cannot see, but which in moments of exaltation he can sense. When he is on the way that leads to dedication, he sees in his acts of sacrifice a voluntary and even a desired abandonment of success or failure. His tears and laughter, his pains and his pleasures, can now be looked upon as passing phases, welcome because from these he can extract offerings worthy of the Supreme. He seeks nothing, and nothing rejects, since anything that comes or departs is the result of the play and interplay of the terrestrial and mortal elements of nature. He is neither pleased nor displeased at the ebbs and tides of existence. He sees them and takes note of them, as any man does the coming on of night or day, of rain or shine, and of the variegated fauna and flora of the world. A renunciation of this order is difficult of attainment, unless the man has willed himself to engage in the right discharge of actions, which are obligated on him by duty. But this duty is stern, it is exacting, and can have no earthly overtones. It cannot discriminate between mine and thine. It cannot lean towards the pleasant and away from the unpleasant. The man in the midst of sacrificial action must be firmly fixed in the understanding that the only self to whom he can look for solace or guidance is the self of all creatures. He can no longer differentiate between man, nor between man and the multitudinous life that surrounds him. As the voice of the silence puts it, feel thyself abiding in all things in the self. If the man desires the life enduring, if he seeks to unite himself with the undying aspect that overbroods him, he must of necessity shun the mortal trappings of life. He cannot prepare for a journey to the immortal, and still attach himself by lengthening chains to those aspects of the perishable which still arouse fond memories of the past. He can approach bliss only when the bonds of earthly joys and woes lose their power to disturb his safe, eternal peace. Knowing that I, the great Lord of all worlds, am the enjoyer of all sacrifices and penances, and the friend of all creatures, he shall obtain me and be blessed.